My name is Paige, 29 years old, and I never thought I would be packing up my childhood bedroom while my mother watched coldly from the doorway. For 4 years I had lived with her, after Dad died, helping in every way possible. Then my sister Stephanie arrived with her husband Daniel, claiming they needed family support. That night Mom delivered her ultimatum. You can take the guest room or move out. Stephanie appeared behind her, adding cheerfully, Great if you're out by the weekend. I left. Their smug satisfaction lasted until everything fell apart without me. If you're enjoying this story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button for more real-life family drama. Before everything imploded, I had created a stable, if not entirely fulfilling life for myself in my childhood home. 4 years ago, my father William died suddenly of a heart attack. The loss devastated our family, but especially me. Dad and I had always been incredibly close. He was the one who understood my quirky sense of humor, encouraged my ambitions, and always made me feel valued. My relationship with my mother Margaret was different. Where Dad was warm and expressive, Mom was practical and emotionally reserved. She and my sister Stephanie shared a special bond that sometimes left me feeling like an outsider in my own family. After Dad died, I made the decision to move back to our family home in suburban Boston. It was a beautiful, colonial-style house with a wraparound porch where Dad and I used to sit drinking lemonade in summer. Every corner held memories of him. The house technically belonged to both Stephanie and me after Dad's death, with Mom having lifetime rights to live there. At the time, it seemed logical that I would be the one to move back. Stephanie had relocated to Chicago 5 years earlier, with her husband Daniel, establishing what she constantly described as a thriving life there. I had been working as a marketing executive at a prominent firm in downtown Boston. The move home required significant career adjustments. I negotiated a remote position, with my company accepting a 15% pay cut in the process. My boss was understanding, but made it clear that this would likely slow my career progression. Still, family comes first, right? At least, that's what I believed. The financial arrangements seemed fair at first. I paid half the household bills, handled all home maintenance issues, and took charge of managing Mom's increasing medical needs. At 67, she was still relatively independent, but struggled with high blood pressure and early arthritis. I drove her to doctor appointments, managed her medications, and made sure she followed her treatment plans. Our weekly routine became predictable. Mondays I worked while doing laundry between conference calls. Tuesdays included grocery shopping after work. Wednesdays were for Mom's various medical appointments. Thursdays I cleaned the house. Weekends were filled with yard work and home repairs. The old house constantly needed something fixed or updated. Dad had always handled these things, and now they fell to me. I learned plumbing basics from YouTube videos and became surprisingly proficient at fixing leaky faucets and unclogging drains. Gradually, my social circle dwindled. Friends stopped calling when I repeatedly declined invitations, too exhausted or busy with household responsibilities. The only friend who remained consistently in my life was Tara, who lived in an apartment downtown and regularly insisted I take breaks from caregiving. You're being taken for granted, she would tell me during our monthly dinner dates. Your mom is completely capable of hiring help, you know. I always defended my choices, explaining that this arrangement was temporary just until Mom adjusted to life without Dad. My childhood bedroom became my sanctuary. I had redecorated slightly, but kept many elements from my youth. The walls were still the soft blue Dad had painted them when I was 12. My collection of vintage cameras still lined the bookshelf, a hobby he had encouraged. The window overlooked the backyard garden we had tended together. At night, I often sat on the window seat, looking at the stars and imagining him somewhere watching over us. Meanwhile, Stephanie's presence in our lives became increasingly distant. Our weekly phone calls dwindled to monthly, then to major holidays only. When she did call, she spoke mostly with Mom, their conversations filled with laughter and inside jokes that excluded me even when I was sitting right there. I noticed these calls becoming more frequent about 2 months before everything changed, though Stephanie seemed tense during them, often stepping away to speak privately. Mom's behavior toward me had been subtly shifting as well. Her usual emotional distance grew more pronounced. My efforts around the house received fewer thanks. My suggestions were more frequently dismissed, and she began making small comments about how I was still figuring things out at my age, despite my stable career and significant contributions to our household. The last normal week before everything changed, I overheard Mom on the phone with Stephanie, her voice unusually animated. "Of course we can make it work," she said. "Family comes first." When I asked about the call, she vaguely mentioned Stephanie might visit soon, but quickly changed the subject. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs, but I was too caught up in the daily routines of our life to see the approaching storm. Thursday evening started like any other. I was in the kitchen, making chicken parmesan, Mom's favorite, while she watched her evening game shows in the living room. The spring air was coming through the open windows, carrying the scent of the lilac bushes Dad had planted years ago. I had just put the chicken in the oven when the doorbell rang. "Can you get that?" Mom called from the living room, though she was actually closer to the door than I was. Wiping my hands on a dish towel, I made my way to the front door. When I opened it, I froze. There stood Stephanie and Daniel, surrounded by what looked like a mountain of expensive luggage. 4 large suitcases, 2 carry-ons, and multiple shopping bags crowded our front porch. "Surprise!" Stephanie exclaimed, throwing her arms around me in an embrace that felt more performative than genuine. At 32, my sister still looked like she had stepped out of a magazine. Her blonde hair was perfectly highlighted. Her designer jeans probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and diamond studs glittered in her ears. Daniel stood awkwardly behind her, offering a small wave. "Hey, Paige. Long time no see." He was tall and conventionally handsome in that investment banker way, with carefully styled dark hair and an expensive watch gleaming on his wrist. I had always found him pleasant enough, if somewhat bland. Stephanie Mom's voice came from behind me, filled with more excitement than I had heard from her in months. She practically pushed past me to embrace my sister. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" "We wanted to surprise you," Stephanie said, her voice taking on the slightly childish tone she always used with Mom. "We need a little family time right now." I stood back watching as Mom ushered them in, completely forgetting about me still standing in the doorway. I was left to deal with the luggage, struggling to bring in the heavy cases while they disappeared into the living room, already deep in conversation. The amount of luggage struck me as excessive for what should have been a short visit. By the time I had dragged everything into the foyer and returned to the kitchen to check on dinner, they were laughing together like I had never left the room. I extended dinner for 3 to 4, adding more pasta to stretch the meal. "So what brings you home?" I asked as we finally sat down to eat. "Is everything okay in Chicago?" I noticed Daniel and Stephanie exchange a quick glance before she answered. "Everything's fine," Stephanie said dismissively. "We just needed a break. The corporate world is so demanding, you know. Not that you would understand with your remote setup." The slight dig was typical Stephanie, always finding ways to minimize my career achievements. Actually working remotely comes with its own challenges, I started to explain, but Mom interrupted. "Stephanie just closed a huge design project for a celebrity client," she announced proudly. "She was featured in Chicago Home magazine." This was news to me. Last I heard, Stephanie's interior design business was just getting off the ground. That's great, I said sincerely. Which celebrity? Oh, I signed an NDA, Stephanie said quickly. Can't share details. She smoothly changed the subject, launching into stories about their supposedly glamorous life in Chicago. Throughout dinner, I noticed several inconsistencies in her stories, and the tension between her and Daniel was palpable. When she mentioned their beautiful condo overlooking Lake Michigan, Daniel seemed to flinch slightly. The entire meal, Mom barely looked at me, completely enraptured by Stephanie's presence. It was a familiar dynamic from our childhood, but somehow more painful now, after 4 years of it being just the two of us. After dinner, I started clearing dishes while they continued chatting. Let Paige handle the cleanup, Mom said, when Stephanie offered token assistance. She has a system. Later that evening, as I was finishing loading the dishwasher, I overheard Daniel and Stephanie having a heated, whispered argument in the guest bathroom. We can't keep this up forever, he hissed. We need to tell them the truth. Not yet, Stephanie responded. Mom will help us, but we need to do this my way. I moved away, before they could catch me eavesdropping, troubled by what I had heard. Something was definitely wrong, despite their outward appearance of success. That night around 11, I was already in bed reading when my bedroom door opened without a knock. Mom stood there, her expression unreadable. Stephanie hovered just behind her in the hallway. We need to discuss sleeping arrangements, Mom said, her tone businesslike. Stephanie and Daniel need a proper bedroom while they're here. Okay, I said, setting my book down. How long are they staying? The guest room has a queen bed. That's not suitable, Mom replied. They need more space. They'll be taking your room. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. My room? But where would I sleep? You can take the guest room, or move out, she said, delivering the ultimatum that would change everything. Her voice was cold, detached, like we were discussing a business transaction, rather than my home of 4 years, not to mention my entire childhood before that. Stephanie stepped forward, then her expression sympathetic, but her eyes gleaming with something that looked disturbingly like triumph. Great if you're out by the weekend, she added cheerfully. We have a lot of things being shipped from Chicago. I looked between them, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was all a joke, but their expressions remained serious. Mom, I said, my voice shaking slightly. I've been living here for 4 years, helping with everything. I pay half the bills. I take care of the house, your appointments. Stephanie needs your room, Mom interrupted. She's going through something difficult right now and needs family support. And I don't count as family who deserves support, I asked, hurt blooming in my chest. Don't be dramatic, Paige, Mom sighed. It's just a bedroom. You can use the guest room. Stephanie and Daniel need more space than you do. That night, I moved my essential items to the guest room, a tiny space with an ancient twin bed that sagged in the middle and smelled faintly of mothballs. I lay awake for hours, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, trying to understand what was happening to my family and why my years of support and sacrifice seemed to count for nothing. I woke early the next morning after a fitful sleep, my back aching from the lumpy guest bed. The sun was barely up when I heard voices coming from the kitchen below. Stephanie and Daniel were having what they thought was a private conversation, their words drifting up through the old house's air vents. She has no idea how perfect this is working out, Stephanie was saying, her voice smug. I told you Mom always picks me. She always has. What about the money situation? Daniel asked, his voice tense. We need to figure something out soon. The credit card companies keep calling. Mom will help, Stephanie replied confidently. She always does. And little Miss Perfect Paige is so responsible. She's probably been bankrolling this place anyway. Their voices faded as they moved away from the vent, but I had heard enough to raise my suspicions further. Money situation credit card companies calling. This didn't sound like the successful power couple Stephanie had been portraying. I tried to focus on work that day but missed an important deadline as family tension distracted me. My boss was understanding but concerned, mentioning that my performance had been slipping lately. After a difficult video call, I decided to confront Stephanie directly. I found her alone in the kitchen scrolling through her phone while drinking the expensive specialty coffee she had insisted Mom buy that morning. "We need to talk," I said, closing the kitchen door behind me. "What's really going on, Stephanie? Why are you and Daniel really here?" Stephanie looked up, annoyance flashing across her face before she composed it into a neutral expression. "I told you we're just visiting. Taking a break." With enough luggage for a month and mysterious shipments coming from Chicago, I pressed. "I overheard you and Daniel talking about money problems. Is that what this is about?" Something in Stephanie's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. "Fine. The economy's been tough. Daniel's company went through some restructuring, and my design business had a few setbacks. We needed to regroup. That's all. So, why not just tell us that? Why the act? And why do you need my bedroom?" "Because we're staying a while, okay?" She snapped, her composed mask slipping further. "And it's not like you're doing anything important with your life anyway. You've been living rent-free like a child for 4 years." The accusation stung especially because it was untrue. Rent-free, I pay half of all the bills. I manage the entire household. I take Mom to every medical appointment, handle all the maintenance, do all the shopping and cleaning. What exactly have you contributed from Chicago?" Stephanie's expression shifted to something resembling guilt before hardening again. "Well, it's not like you have your own family to take care of. Daniel and I have a certain lifestyle to maintain. Mom understands that." "What does that mean?" Stephanie examined her manicure, avoiding my eyes. "Mom's been sending us money, if you must know. She said it was from her savings, but I'm guessing it might have been your rent money. Not my problem, how she manages her finances." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. For 4 years, I had faithfully paid my share of expenses, believing we were partners in maintaining the household. All while Mom had been redirecting those funds to support Stephanie's apparently fake successful life in Chicago. I found Mom in the garden later that afternoon tending to her roses. These were tasks I usually handled, but she had suddenly taken an interest now that Stephanie was home. "Is it true?" I asked without preamble. "Have you been sending Stephanie the money I've been contributing to this household?" Mom straightened slowly, brushing dirt from her gardening gloves. Her expression was defensive rather than guilty. "What I do with family resources is my business, Paige." "It's my money," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Money I earned while working full-time and taking care of this house and you." "Stephanie has needs," Mom replied, as if that explained everything. "She and Daniel have a certain lifestyle to maintain. You've always been more practical, like your father." She said this last part like it was a character flaw. "So, you've been lying to me for years, taking my contributions while letting me believe we were partners in this." "Don't be so dramatic. Family helps family. Stephanie has always had greater potential than you. She just needs support to reach it." The casual cruelty of her assessment left me speechless. In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity the dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. Stephanie was the golden child, who could do no wrong, whose needs always came first. I was the reliable one, who could be counted on to sacrifice without complaint, whose contributions could be taken for granted. "I see," I said finally, a strange calm settling over me. Well, this certainly clarifies things. That evening, I called Tara, explaining the situation through tears I couldn't hold back. Stay with me, she offered immediately. My spare room is yours for as long as you need it. I've been telling you for years they're taking advantage of you. The next day, I began packing in earnest. Not just the few essentials I had moved to the guest room, but everything that mattered to me from my childhood bedroom. Photo albums Dad and I had put together. The vintage camera collection he had helped me start. Books we had read together. As I carefully wrapped each memory, I could almost hear his voice. Know your worth, Paige Bear. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Daniel found me packing in what was now their room, awkwardly hovering in the doorway. I'm sorry about all this, he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if afraid Stephanie might appear. Things haven't been great for us, but this isn't right. Then why are you going along with it? I asked carefully, placing my father's watch in a small box. It's complicated, he sighed. Stephanie doesn't handle failure well. Never has. Neither do I replied, closing another box with finality. But I'd rather leave than stay where I'm not valued. By Saturday morning, my car was packed with everything I could fit. Mom watched from the front door as I made my final trip carrying a small plant Dad had given me years ago. You're being ridiculous, she said. Where will you go? What will you do? I have friends, I replied simply, and I've been managing just fine for years. I'm sure you and Stephanie will figure things out. You'll be back when you run out of options, she predicted coldly. You always were too sensitive, just like your father. I paused at the bottom of the porch steps, looking back at the woman I had devoted 4 years to supporting. That's the nicest thing you've said to me in years, I told her. And no, Mom, I won't be back. Not like this. As I drove away from my childhood home, tears blurred my vision briefly before I wiped them away. Something had broken inside me, but something else, something stronger, was finally free. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp as I loaded the last of my belongings into my car. The driveway was silent, except for the sound of birds and the occasional car passing on our quiet street. I had deliberately chosen to leave early, hoping to avoid a dramatic scene with Stephanie or further cold dismissals from Mom. As I placed the final box in my trunk, I noticed Mom watching from the living room window. Her expression was unreadable behind the glass, neither sad nor concerned, simply observing. Stephanie was nowhere to be seen, probably still asleep in my former bedroom. Just before closing the trunk, I realized something was missing. The family photo albums I had carefully packed were not among my boxes. I checked the front seat, the back seat, even underneath the larger items in the trunk. Nothing. With a sinking feeling, I realized they must still be in the house. Reluctantly, I went back inside, finding the albums neatly stacked on the hall table. Had I forgotten them, or had someone removed them from my packed belongings? I couldn't be sure, but the sight of them sitting there felt like a final, small betrayal. These were the physical records of my history, my childhood, with Dad, our family. Before everything fractured, I gathered them silently and returned to my car. Mom had moved to the front door by then. The spare key she asked hand extended her first words to me that morning. I removed it from my keychain and placed it in her palm without comment. She nodded once, as if concluding a business transaction. Your mail will be forwarded, she said. Goodbye, Mom, I said, waiting a moment for any sign of warmth or regret. There was none. You know where we are if you need us, she replied, which wasn't quite the same as saying I would be welcomed back. The drive to Tara's apartment took 30 minutes each mile, increasing the distance between my past life and whatever uncertain future awaited me. I found myself taking deep breaths at stoplights, alternating between tears and strange bursts of unexpected liberation. Tara was waiting outside her apartment building when I arrived, immediately helping me unload the car. Her third-floor walk-up in downtown Boston was trendy but tiny compared to the spacious family home I had left behind. The spare room was barely large enough for a twin bed and small dresser, but Tara had cleared space in her closet and bathroom for my things. "Welcome to Independence," she said, handing me a glass of wine after we'd brought everything up. It was barely noon, but the day had already felt several years long. "I can't believe I actually left," I said, sinking onto her couch. 4 years of my life, just over. 4 years of being taken for granted, Tara corrected gently. "This has been coming for a long time, Paige." That first night away from home was a strange mixture of emotions. I lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the city sound so different from my quiet suburban neighborhood. There was grief for what I had lost, but also an unexpected sense of possibility. For the first time in years, I had no one to care for but myself. Sunday was spent organizing my minimal living space, creating some semblance of order in my drastically downsized life. Tara helped me hang a few pictures, arranged my clothes in the small dresser, and made room on her bookshelves for my most treasured volumes. "It's temporary," she assured me. "Just until you figure out your next steps. No rush." By evening, my phone had remained silent. No calls from Mom checking if I had arrived safely. No message from Stephanie expressing any remorse. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of my dispensability still stung. Monday morning brought the first contact from my former household. A text from Mom appeared as I was preparing for my workday. "Where do we keep the furnace filter replacements? The heat is making strange noises." No acknowledgement of my departure, no questions about my well-being, just a practical inquiry about house maintenance that had always been my responsibility. I didn't respond immediately, focusing instead on my work meetings. With fewer distractions and responsibilities, I found my productivity increasing dramatically. I completed a major project proposal 2 days ahead of schedule and received positive feedback from my boss for the first time in months. Tuesday brought the first call from Stephanie. "Hey, do you have the password to the family photo cloud storage? Mom can't remember it, and there are some pictures we want to print." Again, no mention of the circumstances of my departure, no acknowledgement of the situation. Just a practical request as if nothing had changed. I provided the password but kept the conversation brief and professional. That evening, I discovered something disturbing while reviewing my financial accounts. Mom had removed me as an authorized user on the family credit card, which I had used for household purchases and her medical expenses. Additionally, my online access to the family bank account had been revoked. They were systematically cutting financial ties while still expecting my practical support. Wednesday, I contacted Jackson, a friend from college, who now worked as a lawyer specializing in property law. Over lunch, I explained the situation with the house. "So legally, you and your sister both own the house, with your mother having lifetime rights to live there," he clarified, taking notes. "That's what Dad's will specified," I confirmed. "Though I'm starting to think I should have been more involved in the financial aspects of the arrangement." Jackson looked troubled. "They can't actually force you out of your ownership interest, Paige. Even if you're not living there, you have legal rights to the property. Have you been documenting your financial contributions to the household?" Fortunately, I had been. Years of managing household finances had made me methodical about record keeping. I promised to send Jackson copies of everything for his review. As the first week progressed, I began to recognize how much of myself I had surrendered to caregiving. Friends I hadn't seen in months eagerly welcomed me back into their lives. I joined a Thursday night book club I had always been too busy for previously. On Friday evening, I had dinner with colleagues without worrying about getting home to prepare Mom's medication. Gradually, I was remembering who Paige was, beyond just a caretaker and daughter. The realization was both liberating and painful, highlighting how much of my identity had been subsumed by family responsibilities. The weekend brought another series of texts from both Mom and Stephanie about various household matters. The garbage disposal was acting up. The garden hose had a leak. The internet was running slow. Each message assumed I would provide solutions from afar, with no recognition that these issues were no longer my responsibility. I responded to each with a brief suggestion to call appropriate service professionals, providing numbers when I had them. To Mom's complaint about the cost of such services, I simply replied, "That's unfortunately one of the downsides of my moving out." 10 days into my new living situation, I scheduled my first therapy session, something I had considered for years but never found time for. Dr. Warner listened attentively as I described the family dynamics that had led to my current situation. "What you're describing sounds like a classic golden child and scapegoat dynamic," she observed. "Your sister was positioned as the special one whose needs came first, while you were expected to be the responsible one whose needs were secondary." "But I was fine with helping," I insisted. "I wanted to support Mom after Dad died." "Supporting family is admirable," Dr. Warner agreed. "But there's a difference between mutual support and one-sided exploitation. You gave support, but received very little in return. That's not a healthy dynamic, and your decision to leave was an important step toward establishing healthier boundaries." As I left her office, I felt a mixture of validation and sadness. The patterns she described had been operating in our family for decades, invisible to me until they became too extreme to ignore. Now that I could see them clearly, I wondered if my relationship with Mom and Stephanie could ever be genuinely reciprocal. On the 10th day after my departure, the first truly urgent call came from home. I was in the middle of a work presentation when my phone lit up with Mom's number. I let it go to voicemail, finishing my meeting before checking the message. "Paige, the heating system is making terrible noises and there's no heat. It's freezing in here. Call me back immediately." The Boston spring had turned unexpectedly cold, with temperatures dropping into the 30s overnight. The old furnace had always been temperamental, requiring specific maintenance routines that I had handled for years. When I called back, Mom answered on the first ring. "Finally," she said. "The heat has been out for hours. You need to tell us what to do." "Have you checked the pilot light?" I asked automatically, slipping into problem-solving mode. Daniel tried, but he said he couldn't figure it out. "Stephanie is freezing. Can you come over?" The request gave me pause. After everything that had happened, they expected me to simply appear and fix things as if nothing had changed. "Mom, I'm not living there anymore, remember? You might need to call a heating service." "A service will cost hundreds of dollars," she protested. "You've always handled these things." "Yes, I did," I agreed. "That was one of the many ways I contributed to the household. But since I've moved out, you'll need to find alternatives. I'm sure Daniel can figure it out with a quick internet search. Or there's the HVAC company card in the kitchen drawer." The silence on the other end was heavy with surprise. She had genuinely expected me to drop everything and come running. "I see," she said finally. "Well, we'll manage somehow." "I hope you get it sorted quickly," I replied sincerely. "Let me know if you need the company's number." After hanging up, I felt a complex mix of guilt and vindication. Part of me still wanted to help to be the dependable daughter I had always been. But another part recognized this as a necessary boundary one that would never be established if I continued jumping in to rescue them from every difficulty. The following day, I had coffee with Nancy, an older neighbor from my mom's street who had always been kind to me. She had reached out after hearing about my sudden move, concerned about what had happened. "I have to say, I'm not entirely surprised," Nancy said after I explained the situation. "There's been talk around the neighborhood." Talk about what I asked. Nancy looked uncomfortable. About Stephanie and Daniel. Patricia's son works at the same firm where Daniel was employed. Apparently, he didn't just leave his job. There were allegations. Something about funds being misappropriated. This was significantly different from Stephanie's vague explanation about company restructuring. Allegations of embezzlement, I clarified, shocked. "I don't know the details," Nancy admitted. But it wasn't an amicable departure. And Stephanie's design business, no one in Chicago's design community seems to have heard of it. Patricia's daughter is an interior designer there and said it never got off the ground. The picture becoming clearer was disturbing. Stephanie and Daniel hadn't just experienced setbacks, they appeared to have fabricated much of their successful image. Their financial situation was likely far worse than they had admitted. Over the next few days, the messages from home increased in frequency and urgency. Mom couldn't find important medical paperwork. Stephanie couldn't figure out how to reset the internet router. The dishwasher was leaking. Each text or call carried the implicit expectation that I would provide immediate solutions. I maintained polite but firm boundaries, offering brief suggestions but refusing to be drawn back into the caretaker role. "I'm sure you can handle it," became my gentle refrain. 2 weeks after my departure, I received a concerned call from Dr. Levine's office. Mom had missed her important cardiology appointment, one I had always managed for her. "We tried calling her directly," the nurse explained, "but she didn't answer. You're still listed as her emergency contact." I thanked her for the information, promising to remind Mom to reschedule. When I called, Mom sounded frazzled and defensive. "I forgot. There's been so much going on here without you." "Mom, that appointment was important for monitoring your heart condition," I said, genuinely worried. "You need to reschedule right away." "I know that," she snapped. "But it's hard to keep track of everything. You always handled all this." "Because you let me," I pointed out gently. "But you managed just fine before I moved home, and you can again. Maybe use the calendar app I set up on your phone. All your appointments are already loaded there." Later that day, I noticed something strange while scrolling through social media. Stephanie had posted new pictures of herself and Daniel at what appeared to be an expensive restaurant, captioned, "Living our best life." The image showed champagne glasses and high-end food, completely contradicting the financial difficulties they had partially admitted to. They were still maintaining the facade of success while privately dealing with what seemed to be serious financial collapse. The truth of their situation became even clearer when Daniel showed up unexpectedly at Tara's apartment the next evening. I was surprised to find him standing awkwardly in the hallway when I answered Tara's door. "How did you find me?" I asked, not inviting him in. "Stephanie has your friend on social media," he explained, looking uncomfortable. "Can we talk just for a few minutes?" Reluctantly, I agreed to speak with him at the coffee shop downstairs. Once seated with coffees, neither of us touched Daniel's carefully maintained facade, finally cracked. "Things are bad, Paige," he admitted, rubbing his face tiredly. "Really bad. The truth is, I lost my job 6 months ago. Not because of restructuring. There were accusations. Accounting irregularities. I didn't do what they claimed, but I couldn't fight it without exposing other issues. What issues? I pressed. Trading using insider information, he said quietly. Nothing that could be proven, but enough that I had to leave quietly. There was no severance package. And Stephanie's design business? He laughed humorlessly. Never got a single client. She spent thousands setting up a beautiful office space, created a website, printed business cards, but couldn't actually land any projects. She blamed the economy, the Chicago design scene, everything except her lack of experience or portfolio. The full picture was worse than I had imagined. So you've had no income for 6 months. None, he confirmed. We've been living on credit cards, draining our savings, and yes, the money your mother has been sending. Our condo in Chicago is in foreclosure. We had to leave before we were formally evicted. Most of our furniture and belongings are in storage we can't afford to keep paying for. And let me guess, Stephanie hasn't told Mom the full extent of this. She can't admit failure, Daniel said, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Never could. She told your mother, we're just experiencing temporary setbacks and need a little family support while we relocate our successful business to Boston. I sat back, processing this information. Why are you telling me this now? Because everything's falling apart without you there, he said simply. Your mother doesn't know how to manage the house. Stephanie certainly doesn't. I'm trying, but it's clear you were handling far more than anyone realized. Stephanie won't admit it, but we need your help. I offered help for 4 years, I reminded him, and was taken for granted, lied to, and ultimately pushed out of my own home. I know, he acknowledged, and I'm sorry for my part in that. But is there any way you could just help with some of the house maintenance issues, for your mother's sake? His plea sparked a mixture of sympathy and resolve. I can't go back to how things were, Daniel. You all need to figure this out without me. As we parted, I felt a strange new confidence. For the first time, I wasn't the one seeking approval or assistance. My independence, forced though it had been initially, was becoming a source of strength rather than isolation. The following week brought an unexpected development at work. My boss called me into a virtual meeting to discuss a potential promotion. Your work has been exceptional these past few weeks, she noted. Whatever personal issues were affecting your performance before seem to have resolved. We're considering you for the senior marketing strategist position that's opening next month. The irony wasn't lost on me. Only by being pushed out of my caretaking role had I been able to refocus on my career and personal growth. Sometimes, losing what you think you need opens the door to what you actually deserve. 3 weeks after moving out, I received a bank statement that raised new concerns. There had been a significant withdrawal from my personal savings account using a check written weeks earlier that I had forgotten about. Mom had asked me to write it for property taxes, but the amount seemed excessive now that I thought about it. I made a note to look into the property tax records for the house, wondering what other financial irregularities might exist beneath the surface of our family dynamics. Exactly 3 weeks after my departure at nearly midnight, my phone erupted with Stephanie's ringtone. I almost didn't answer, but something about the late hour suggested genuine emergency. Hello, I answered cautiously. Paige. Stephanie's voice was high with panic. You need to come home right now. The pipe in the upstairs bathroom burst, and there's water everywhere. Everything is ruined. I could hear the sound of rushing water in the background and Mom's voice calling frantically for towels. Despite everything, my heart raced with concern for the old house I still loved. Have you turned off the water main? I asked, already reaching for my shoes. We can't find it, Stephanie cried. Daniel's looking in the basement, but there's already water coming through the ceiling downstairs. It's behind the storage shelves in the northeast corner of the basement, I said, grabbing my car keys. I'll be there as soon as I can. The drive to my former home took 20 minutes each mile, bringing a complex mixture of determination and apprehension. When I arrived, the front yard was illuminated by all the house lights blazing. I didn't bother knocking, using my remaining house key to let myself in. The scene inside was worse than I had imagined. Water had indeed come through the upstairs bathroom floor, saturating the living room ceiling below. A large section had already collapsed, dumping soggy drywall onto the furniture. The hardwood floors were covered in standing water, and the air smelled of dampness and mold. Daniel emerged from the basement, soaking wet. "I found the main water valve and shut it off," he reported, pushing wet hair from his eyes. But not before significant damage was done. Mom appeared from the kitchen looking thinner and more disheveled than when I had left. Her normally perfect hair was unkempt, and she wore a stained house dress I had never seen before. "Paige," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank goodness you're here." Before I could respond, Stephanie came flying down the stairs, still in her pajamas. "The carpet in the hallway is completely soaked," she reported, "and there's water coming through the light fixture in the guest bathroom." She stopped when she saw me, her expression a mixture of relief and embarrassment. "You came." "Of course I came," I said. "This is an emergency." I began issuing instructions, falling naturally back into the role of household manager. "Daniel, check all electrical fixtures for water exposure." "Stephanie, start moving valuable items away from the water." "Mom, call the insurance company first thing in the morning. I'll see what I can do about the immediate water." For the next several hours, we worked together, salvaging what we could, using every towel in the house to soak up water and moving furniture to dry areas. By 3 in the morning, we had done everything possible without professional help. "The restoration company can't come until tomorrow afternoon," Mom said, hanging up the phone after making an emergency call. "They said to run dehumidifiers if we have them." "There's one in the garage," I said, "and another in the basement storage room." I noticed none of them knew this basic information about the house I had maintained for years. As we gathered, exhausted, in the relatively dry kitchen, the full extent of the household's decline became apparent. Dishes were piled in the sink. Mail and papers cluttered every surface. The trash overflowed, and the floor was sticky beneath my feet. This went beyond the water damage, speaking to weeks of neglect. "We should talk," I said, finally, looking at the 3 tired faces around the kitchen table. "About what?" Stephanie asked defensively. "About what's really going on here," I replied firmly. "All of it. No more half-truths or convenient stories. It's time for complete honesty." Mom looked away uncomfortably. Daniel stared at his hands. Stephanie's chin lifted in defiance, but her eyes held unmistakable fear. "Fine," I continued when no one spoke. "I'll start. I know about Daniel's job loss due to allegations of financial misconduct. I know Stephanie's design business never actually existed beyond a website and business cards. I know you're facing foreclosure in Chicago and financial ruin. And I suspect you came here not for a temporary visit, but because you had nowhere else to go." The silence that followed confirmed everything. Finally, Daniel spoke. "It wasn't exactly financial misconduct," he said quietly. "It was a gambling problem that got out of hand. I used company funds temporarily, intending to replace them after a big win, but the win never came." "Gambling," Mom repeated, turning to stare at him. "Stephanie told me there was a corporate restructuring." "There's more," I continued, looking directly at Stephanie. "You've been portraying a successful life in Chicago while actually drowning in debt. You convinced Mom to send you money that I provided for household expenses while maintaining the illusion of success." "We were going to pay it back," Stephanie insisted, tears forming in her eyes, once things turned around. And when were things going to turn around exactly? I asked. Because from what I understand, you have no jobs, no savings, massive debt, and have now lost your Chicago home. This isn't a temporary setback. This is complete financial collapse. She's lying. Stephanie turned desperately to Mom. Mom, tell me she's lying about sending us my rent money. Mom's face crumpled slightly, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in years. I needed to help your sister, she said weakly. She and Daniel have a certain lifestyle to maintain. With what money? I pressed. Because I've been looking into our finances since I left. The property taxes on this house are 3 years behind. There are multiple liens against the property. Mom's retirement account has been nearly depleted. Where did all that money go? Daniel looked squarely at Stephanie, who began to sob. Shopping, he said simply. Luxury goods, designer, clothes, expensive restaurants, keeping up appearances while everything collapsed around us. And gambling, I added, looking at him. How much have you lost? He named a figure that made Mom gasp. Most of it on sports betting. Some online poker. It started small, just a way to try to make extra money when my bonuses were cut. Then it became something else. I turned to Mom, whose shocked expression confirmed she hadn't known the extent of the situation. And your health, Mom. You missed your cardiology appointment. Have you been taking your medications? I got confused without your reminders, she admitted. And I ran out of some of them. The pharmacy said the insurance was declined when I tried to refill them. Because the premiums haven't been paid, I realized, which was my responsibility before I left. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in my mother's eyes. I didn't understand how much you were handling, she said quietly. Not until you were gone. And what was the real plan here? I asked, looking between Stephanie and Daniel. Because those weren't temporary visitor luggage amounts you arrived with. Stephanie and Daniel exchanged glances before she finally spoke. We thought we could move back here permanently, she admitted. Live with Mom, rebuild our finances. Eventually, she trailed off. Eventually take over the house I finished for her. Push me out completely. It wasn't like that she protested weakly, but her eyes told a different story. I stood up from the table, surveying the 3 people whose actions had forced me from my home. Well, your plan worked in part. You did push me out. But it seems you overlooked how much you were all depending on me. As if to emphasize my point, a large crash sounded from the living room as another section of water-damaged ceiling collapsed. What do we do now? Mom asked suddenly, looking every one of her 67 years. First, you deal with this water damage and begin making this house livable again, I said firmly. Then you face reality, all of you. No more pretending, no more hiding from the truth of your situations. I turned to leave, but Mom's voice stopped me. Paige, wait. We need you. I need you. Please come home. For a brief moment, I felt the pull of my lifelong role as the responsible one, the fixer, the caretaker. Then I remembered the cold dismissal, the years of thankless work, the ultimate betrayal of being pushed out of my own home. I can't come back to how things were, I said finally. That life is over for me. But I'll help arrange the restoration company tomorrow, and I'll make sure your medications are refilled, Mom. Beyond that, you all need to figure out your own solutions. As I drove back to Tara's apartment in the early morning hours, I felt an unexpected lightness despite the exhaustion. For the first time, I had faced my family's dysfunction head-on, spoken my truth, and walked away with my boundaries intact. Something fundamental had shifted not just in their perception of me, but in my perception of myself. The water damage crisis marked a turning point for our family. In the days that followed, I maintained my distance emotionally, while providing limited practical assistance. I coordinated with the restoration company insured. Mom's prescriptions were refilled and connected Daniel with a contractor friend who needed temporary help with manual labor. 1 week after the flood, I arranged a meeting with Jackson, my lawyer friend, at a neutral coffee shop near the family home. Mom, Stephanie, Daniel, and I sat around a table while Jackson outlined our legal and financial realities. The house is jointly owned by Paige and Stephanie, with your mother having lifetime rights to occupy it, he explained, laying out documents. However, the delinquent property taxes have created liens that must be addressed immediately to avoid potential foreclosure. Foreclosure. Mom repeated, paling visibly. Unfortunately, yes, Jackson confirmed. Additionally, there are several unpaid utility bills and home insurance premiums that have lapsed. The financial situation is precarious at best. Over the next 2 hours, we created a formal agreement addressing everyone's responsibilities going forward. Mom would remain in the house, but with a clear understanding of household management duties. Stephanie and Daniel would move to a small apartment across town that fit their drastically reduced circumstances and begin financial counseling to address their substantial debts. I would retain my ownership share of the house, but continue living independently. As we were preparing to leave, Mom asked to speak with me privately. We walked to a quiet corner of the cafe, away from the others. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "A substantial one. For years I took you for granted while favoring Stephanie. I convinced myself it was because she needed more support. But the truth is, I always found it easier to give in to her demands than to acknowledge her flaws. And mine were always on display, because I was actually dealing with real life instead of creating an illusion," I added quietly. "Yes," Mom admitted. "You're so much like your father that way. Practical, reliable, honest. I think after he died, it was easier to focus on Stephanie because she didn't remind me of him constantly the way you do." She took a deep breath. "I miss him terribly, even after all these years. But that's no excuse for how I treated you." Her admission was more than I had ever expected to hear from her. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. "It helps to understand why." "My therapist says I need to address the patterns I've created," she continued, surprising me further. She must have seen my expression because she smiled slightly. "Yes, I've started therapy. Apparently, near financial ruin and a collapsing ceiling can motivate change." The weeks that followed brought gradual but significant changes to all our lives. I received the promotion I had been working toward, complete with a substantial raise that allowed me to begin looking for my own apartment. I found a sunny one-bedroom in a neighborhood I had always admired, but could never afford before. Moving my belongings from Tara's spare room to my own place felt ceremonial, a physical manifestation of my newfound independence. I carefully arranged my father's books on new shelves, hung photos of happier family times, and splurged on a comfortable reading chair reminiscent of the one he had kept in his study. Meanwhile, Stephanie and Daniel moved into a small one-bedroom apartment in a less desirable part of town. The transition was especially difficult for Stephanie, who had to sell many of her luxury possessions to help address their debts. Daniel found steady work with my contractor friend, while Stephanie eventually secured a position as a sales associate at a home decor store, a humbling but practical use of her design interest. Mom's health improved under a new arrangement where I helped manage her medical appointments from afar, while a weekly visiting nurse checked her medications and vitals. She began taking active interest in maintaining the house, learning many of the basic maintenance tasks I had handled for years. Our family relationships slowly transformed as well. The weekly dinners Mom and I established became a neutral ground for rebuilding trust. Conversation was sometimes awkward, occasionally tense, but increasingly authentic in a way our interactions had never been before. Stephanie began attending both financial counseling and personal therapy, gradually confronting the insecurities that had driven her lifelong need for status and admiration. Our relationship remained complicated, but moments of genuine connection began to emerge from beneath the competition and resentment that had characterized our sisterhood for decades. "I always thought Dad loved you more," she admitted during one rare honest conversation. "You were so much like him, and I was always trying to get his attention." "And I always thought Mom loved you more," I replied. "So I focused on making Dad proud instead." "We were both right, in a way," she acknowledged sadly. "That's pretty messed up, isn't it?" By Thanksgiving, 6 months after my departure from the family home, we gathered for a holiday meal that felt different from any before. The dining room still showed subtle signs of water damage, but the food was plentiful, the conversation genuine, and the power dynamics fundamentally altered. As we cleared dishes afterward, Mom pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly, "not just for how you've helped us through this crisis, but for having the courage to walk away when you needed to. Your father would be proud too." Her words touched a place in my heart that had long needed healing. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Later that evening, as I drove back to my own apartment, I reflected on the strange journey of the past months. Being forced out of my childhood home had initially seemed like rejection and betrayal. In reality, it had become the catalyst for growth I didn't know I needed. Sometimes, the most painful moments in our lives create the necessary conditions for transformation. My sister's return and my mother's ultimatum had shattered my comfortable but unfulfilling existence. From those broken pieces, I had built something new, something genuinely mine. The family home would always hold my history, but my future belonged in spaces of my own creation, surrounded by people who valued me not just for what I could provide, but for who I truly was. Have you ever experienced a situation where what seemed like rejection actually opened the door to something better in your life? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that sometimes being pushed out is actually the first step toward finding where you truly belong. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to value yourself.